My life felt like a dream come true, one of those you are terrified to wake up from because it feels too perfect to be real. I was about to marry Julian. He was the man I had pictured for years as the father of my children, my life partner, my safest haven in a chaotic world. Everything was prepared with such care. The flowers, the menu, the music, even the small details only we understood. My mother cried tears of joy as I looked at myself in the mirror, dressed in my white gown, thinking that I had finally found true happiness. I looked at my reflection, and I saw a woman who had everything she ever wanted. But what I didn't know was that this wedding, which was supposed to seal a love story, would actually mark the beginning of my greatest tragedy. But I had no idea what was coming. From the start, I knew I couldn't walk down the aisle without my best friend Laura by my side. She was more than just a friend. She was my soul sister, my confidant, the only person who knew every corner of my heart, every fear, and every dream. That's why I chose her as my maid of honor without a second thought. No one questioned my decision, because everyone knew how deep our connection was. We had been inseparable since college. She smiled with a genuine-looking tenderness as she helped me with my veil and made sure everything was perfect. "You look beautiful," she told me, her eyes shimmering. I squeezed her hand, feeling so lucky to have her. But what I didn't know was that behind her sweet eyes, a dark secret was hiding. A secret that would destroy my life from the inside out. We wanted an intimate wedding, far from the hustle and bustle of the city. That's why we chose an elegant estate in the hills of Virginia, surrounded by century-old trees and blooming gardens. The place was magical. It had a stately stone manor, cozy rooms, and a hall with high ceilings and enormous windows that let in the warm light of the setting sun. There, surrounded by our families and closest friends, we dreamed of celebrating our love and starting a new life together. Nothing seemed out of place. Everything felt harmonious, like the universe had aligned just for us. But that same place would soon witness the most painful collapse of my existence. We had rented the entire estate for the weekend so that our parents and the wedding party could stay the night before and after the wedding. We wanted it to be more than just an event. We wanted it to be a moment of togetherness, shared laughter, and joyful anticipation. The night before, we all had dinner together on the patio. It was lit by string lights, with soft music playing and glasses of wine in our hands. Julian seemed calm, even affectionate. He held my hand under the table, and I felt a warmth spreading through my chest. Laura never left my side, just as always, laughing at my dad's bad jokes and refilling my water glass. No one suspected that behind all that calm, a storm was brewing that would change our lives forever. That night, I went to bed with a heart full of hope. I mentally replayed every moment of the day, convinced that I had finally found happiness. I fell asleep late, feeling nervous but happy, picturing the moment I would walk toward Julian in my white dress. I thought things were fine, until that day. The next morning, the first rays of sun came through the window, and I woke up with an energy I hadn't felt since I was a little girl. It was the day. Laura was the first one to enter my room, bringing me breakfast with a smile that I now remember as a mask. "Eat something," she said softly. "You need your strength." I felt grateful, excited, and secure. I couldn't have known that nothing was real anymore. When it was time, my father took my arm. His eyes were wet, and he looked at me with so much pride it almost made me cry right there. We walked toward the garden where everyone was waiting for us. The soft sound of string instruments filled the air. White petals covered the ground. The tearful eyes of our loved ones followed me as I moved forward. Everything looked like it was from a storybook. Julian was waiting for me at the end of the aisle with glistening eyes and the smile that had made me fall in love with him so many times. I walked toward him, holding back tears, convinced that I was taking the most important and beautiful step of my life. My heart was racing, but in a good way. No one could have seen that my "I do" would actually be the beginning of my greatest heartbreak. When the officiant asked if we accepted to join our lives, I didn't hesitate for a second. My voice was shaky but firm as I said, "I do." My eyes were full of love as I looked at Julian. He also said, "I do," with a smile. But looking back, for a moment, I thought his expression dimmed right after he said it. A tiny flicker of shadow passed over his face. I just figured it was nerves. I told myself that we all feel that little bit of anxiety when we take such a big step. We kissed to the sound of applause, surrounded by white flowers and tears of emotion. In that instant, I believed it was all worth it. I believed that our love was real and unshakable. The celebration was exactly as we had imagined. It was intimate, elegant, and full of joy. We ate under a starry sky with soft music playing in the background and candles lit at every table. There were moments of laughter, anecdotes, and hugs that seemed sincere. It felt as if we were all a part of something eternal. Julian talked to our guests and laughed, shaking hands and accepting congratulations. But there was something distant in the way he looked at me. It was subtle. Whenever I tried to catch his eye across the table, he seemed to be looking just past me, or at his plate. I didn't want to think too much of it. I thought he was just tired from all the planning and decided to enjoy every second. My father stood up, emotional, to toast our union. He spoke of how proud he was of me and how he had watched our love grow over the years. "To Julian and my daughter," he said, raising his glass. Everyone applauded, and Julian raised his glass with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. It looked forced, like he was acting out a part in a play he didn't want to be in. I looked at him, trying to find that usual spark, but all I found was a strange silence in his gaze. I thought that maybe I was just being too sensitive. I told myself I shouldn't look for problems where there weren't any. But deep down, something inside of me was starting to crack, even though I didn't know it yet. But then, something I never expected happened. After the party, we went up to the bridal suite together. It was a warm and elegant space we had decorated with flowers and candles to make it unforgettable. My heart was pounding. It was a mix of excitement and nerves as I thought about how special this night, our first as husband and wife, would be. I closed the door softly. I wanted to prolong the intimate moment, believing we were about to seal our story with love. I turned to him, smiling, ready to finally be alone with my husband. But the atmosphere in the room changed instantly. Julian placed his watch on the nightstand with a sharp clatter. He took off his shoes without looking at me and sighed heavily. It wasn't a sigh of relief. It was a sigh of burden. I went to hug him, wrapping my arms around his waist from behind. And that's when I heard it. "I'm tired," he said. He didn't look at me. His tone was dry and flat, as if I wasn't even there. I stood frozen. My arms dropped to my sides. I tried to figure out if it was a joke, if something had happened that I didn't see. But his face was serious, distant, and completely devoid of emotion or desire. He turned his back to me. He unbuttoned his shirt slowly, tossing it onto a chair. Then, he went straight to the twin bed that was in a corner of the room, intended for lounging, not sleeping. He didn't say goodnight. He didn't turn around to look at me in my wedding lingerie. He just turned off the light, leaving the room in a silence that hurt more than any yell. My heart dropped into my stomach. I sat on the edge of the marriage bed, the big one we were supposed to share. I didn't know what to do with my body, or my thoughts. I felt invisible on the most important night of my life. I waited for what felt like endless minutes for a gesture, a word, an explanation, anything. But all I got was the sound of his quiet breathing from the other side of the room. I slowly lay down on the bed, unable to hold back the tears. I tried to not make a sound so I wouldn't seem pathetic. The room smelled of fresh flowers, sweet and romantic. But inside my chest, everything was withering. And that's how I spent my first night as a wife. Alone, confused, and with a broken soul. I don't know how long I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling shadows. I was wishing it was all a nightmare. I hoped that Julian would come over and hug me by surprise, apologizing for being so exhausted. But the hours passed. The silence was absolute. His body remained still in the twin bed, as far from me as if we were two strangers in a hotel. At some point, exhaustion won out. I closed my eyes, my lashes wet with tears. But I couldn't have been asleep for more than 30 minutes. Then, a muffled sound woke me up with a jolt. I sat up, my heart racing. I was confused, trying to figure out where I was. Then I remembered. The wedding. The rejection. I turned my head to look at the corner. Julian's bed was empty. The sheets were thrown back, but he was gone. I slowly got up, my bare feet touching the cold floor. I felt a knot in my stomach that I couldn't explain. It was intuition. I walked to the door, opened it carefully, and listened. I heard the sound again. It was a short, stifled groan. It sounded like someone was trying not to make noise. The hallway was dark, only lit by the faint light coming from a room at the end. I stood there for a few seconds. I tried to convince myself that maybe it was a movie playing downstairs. Maybe a guest was watching TV. Anything logical. But something inside me already knew that I was about to hear what I should never have heard. I forced myself to move. I walked without making a sound, stepping on the edges of the runner rug. And that's when I remembered whose room the light was coming from. That room belonged to my mother-in-law, Julian's mother. She had said at the end of the dinner that she was feeling sick. She told us she had to go into town to get some medicine and stay at a hotel closer to the pharmacy because the estate was too isolated. She hadn't been back since. So that room was supposed to be empty. My mind began to piece together the impossible, but my heart refused to believe it. What was Julian doing in there in the middle of the night? Why was he in his mother's room? I took one more step. The groans continued. They were rhythmic now. I moved down the hallway with a pounding heart. A cold sweat ran down my back. I was trying to silence every step so I wouldn't alert whoever was inside. It wasn't just the noise that was bothering me anymore. It was the fact that Julian wasn't in our room on our wedding night. And at that very moment, in that dark hallway, something inside me started connecting loose pieces. Details I had ignored. Looks that hadn't seemed important before. The way they stood next to each other in photos. The jokes they shared that I didn't quite get. I didn't want to think about it. I didn't want to imagine it. But my feet already knew where they were going. My soul had a premonition. It was about to shatter. I stopped right in front of the door that belonged to my mother-in-law, the same one that was supposed to be empty that night. I felt my hands shaking uncontrollably. From inside, the groans continued. They were lower now, as if someone was holding their breath, as if they knew someone was listening. I swallowed hard. My throat felt dry as sandpaper. I put my ear to the wood, holding my breath for a moment so I could hear more clearly. A soft creak of the bed, a muffled sigh, and then a woman's voice. I closed my eyes tightly. I wished I was wrong. I prayed to a God I hadn't spoken to in years that I was crazy. But I recognized it instantly. It was Laura. There was no doubt. Her voice was unmistakable. It was the voice that had comforted me through breakups. The voice that had helped me plan this wedding. Broken whispers. A mix of pleasure and urgency. It blended with little laughs that I had heard so many times in confidence. I felt a sharp blow to my chest. It felt as if someone had knocked me to the ground without warning. I leaned against the wall, dazed. I didn't know whether to scream, run, or pass out right there. Everything we had shared. All our secrets. The long teenage talks about finding the one. The promises of loyalty. All came crashing down with that sound. But the worst was yet to come. What he said next changed everything. And then I heard his voice. Julian's deep, unmistakable voice. He was whispering Laura's name. Laura. Oh God. Laura. He said it between low gasps that left no room for doubt. I felt the ground disappear from under my feet. The air grew thick and heavy. I was losing my breath. It was the voice of my husband. The man who just hours ago had promised me eternal love in front of everyone. And now he was there, in the middle of the night, sharing the bed he had refused to share with me. With my best friend. The tears came without me being able to stop them, but I didn't make a single sound. I rested my forehead against the wall, shaking. I felt smaller than I ever had in my life. I found it hard to understand how this could be happening on my wedding night. In the house where I believed everything was starting, every word they whispered was a dagger straight to my soul. Every groan was a mockery of my love. And still, I didn't move. I froze. A strange calm washed over me, underneath the panic. I decided to stay there, planted in front of the door. Without making a sound, I was going to wait for them to come out so I could face them. I needed to see their faces. I needed to hear their excuses. I needed to confirm with my own eyes what I had already heard with my ears. Time became eternal. Every minute was torture. My heart beat against my chest with a wild force, like a bird trapped in a cage. I closed my eyes, opened them, and I was still there. I didn't leave. I wasn't going to run away. Finally, the noises stopped. There was a heavy silence inside the room. I heard footsteps approaching the door. The handle turned slowly. The door opened suddenly, and Julian came out. His shirt was unbuttoned. His belt was askew. He was running his hands through his hair, looking messy and flushed. He looked like a man who had just been with a woman. He didn't expect to find anyone. When he saw me standing in front of him, he froze. His eyes went wide. Guilt was tattooed on his face instantly. The color drained from his cheeks. He didn't say anything. He just opened his mouth and closed it again. He turned around halfway, as if looking for an explanation for his own betrayal. And then she appeared. Laura came out behind him. Her hair was disheveled. Her makeup was smeared. Her dress was wrinkled, and she was holding her heels in her hand. When she saw me, she froze too. She was rooted to the spot. She looked as if she had seen a ghost. She was unable to pretend, unable to run, unable to hold my gaze. I didn't need any more proof. The image of the two of them spoke volumes. Together, in silence, with guilt in their bodies, it spoke louder than 1,000 words. And still, I dared to ask why. I stood in front of them without moving an inch. I blocked their path. My body was tense, vibrating with adrenaline. My voice was broken by anger and pain, but it was loud. How? I asked. That was all I could get out at first. How could you? I asked them how they had the cold-bloodedness to betray me on my wedding night. Julian didn't know where to look. He looked at the floor, then at the wall. Laura didn't even try to pretend to be surprised. Silence was their first response. It was as if they expected me to just leave without saying anything. As if they thought I would be too weak to confront them. But I didn't move. I didn't stay silent. I didn't give them that way out. Then Julian raised his voice nervously. He tried to gain control of the situation. "You're wrong, Sarah," he stammered. He told me that nothing had happened. He said he had only helped Laura pick up some things his mother had left in the room. "We were just looking for her medicine bag," he lied. His lie was so clumsy, so absurd. For a moment it hurt even more than the betrayal itself. Did he think I was stupid? Did he think I hadn't heard them? Laura didn't say a word. She just looked down while he kept inventing excuses. Each one was more fragile than the last. He looked at me as if I was the one losing control. "Stop it!" I yelled. My voice echoed in the empty hallway. There was no more room for his theater. I told him I had heard everything. "I heard you whispering her name, Julian." I heard her laughing. I described every whisper, every groan. I told him he didn't need to say anything else. I told him that his silence had already said it all. Then Julian dropped his shoulders. He closed his eyes. He realized there was no point in fighting it. He finally admitted it in a low voice. It just happened," he said. He spoke as if he no longer had the strength to keep up the charade. He didn't say he was sorry. He didn't explain why he did it. He just said he had been confused for a while. "I didn't mean for it to happen tonight," he mumbled, as if that justified his betrayal. As if timing was the only problem. Laura burst into tears as soon as she heard his confession. She covered her face with her hands. She began to repeat over and over that she was sorry. "Sarah, please, I didn't want to hurt you," she sobbed. I don't know how things got to this point. Her crying didn't move me. It was too late for tears. It was too late for regrets. For years, she was the person I trusted most. She was the sister I chose. And she had stabbed me in the back, without a moment's hesitation. She was no longer my friend. She wasn't even a stranger. She was a threat. And in front of me, there was only an empty woman. I looked at her and felt nothing but disgust. I felt something inside me break into a million pieces. It was something that had no shape or name, but that held everything I was. My legs were shaking. My chest was burning. I could barely breathe. It felt as if the air was betraying me just like they had. I didn't cry anymore. There were no tears left. Only a mute, dry rage that consumed me from within. My wedding had turned into a nightmare, and I was no longer the same person. I didn't say anything else. I didn't scream. I didn't slap them, even though my hands itched to do it. I just turned around. I walked away from them. I went back to the bridal suite. I gathered my things without looking at anyone. I grabbed my purse, my keys, and my coat. I didn't bother changing out of my wedding dress. I went down the stairs. My gown was heavy, dragging behind me. My face was burning. My soul was in pieces. No one followed me. They stayed in the hallway, cowards to the end. I walked across the garden barefoot. I ignored the cold of the early morning. The fog was beginning to cover the ground, swirling around my ankles. I just wanted to get away, to disappear, to breathe air that didn't smell like a lie. And so I left without a goodbye, without an explanation, with a broken heart and my dignity intact. I walked for hours with no destination. I walked down empty country roads. My expensive dress dragged in the dirt, turning brown at the hem. My makeup was a sad shadow under my eyes. No one passed by. No one asked if I was okay. And in a way, I was grateful that the world kept turning without knowing about my tragedy. I sat on a bench next to a dry field. I shivered from the cold. I replayed what I had heard and seen over and over again. I didn't understand when everything had gone so wrong. Was it months ago? Was it years? It was my wedding night, and I was alone, broken, and lost. When the sky began to lighten, painting the horizon in soft pinks and oranges, I made a decision. I wasn't going to just disappear. I wasn't going to let them spin the story. I retraced my steps. I was guided more by exhaustion than by a conscious decision. The estate was still quiet. It was sleeping under the faint light of dawn, as if nothing had happened. I entered through the back door without a sound. I felt like an intruder in a place that just hours before had been the scene of my happiness. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do, but something inside me needed to find closure. I couldn't leave without telling the truth. I walked toward the dining room. It was filled with the smell of coffee. Soft voices drifted out. Plates of fruit, coffee mugs, and the smiles of strangers filled the room. It was breakfast time for the family. My parents, my in-laws, the wedding party. Everyone was chatting without knowing a thing. They were oblivious to what had happened in the darkness. I stood watching from the doorway. I felt a cold anger grow inside me at all the normalcy. How could they be laughing? How could the sun be shining? No one asked about me yet. No one seemed to have noticed my absence. I quietly wiped my face. I walked in. The room went quiet as they saw me. My dress was dirty. My hair was wild. My eyes were swollen. I asked for their attention. "Excuse me, everyone," I said. My voice was firm. It was calmer than I felt inside. I asked everyone to gather in the main living room immediately. I didn't want any drama or to beat around the bush. I had something to say, and I wasn't going to wait any longer. My father looked at me with a worried expression. "Sarah, what happened?" he asked, standing up. My mother stood up immediately, rushing to my side. One by one, everyone came in. They were confused and expectant. I didn't see Julian or Laura among them, and that in itself said everything. They were hiding. As everyone took their seats, my eyes scanned the room. I was looking for them, hoping deep down for one last cowardly appearance. But neither Julian nor Laura was there. They hadn't dared to show their faces. Their absence confirmed everything without the need for a single word more. My parents realized it right away. They looked at me with unease. They knew that what I was about to say wasn't going to be minor. I stood in the center of the room. I took a deep breath. And then, without shaking, I spoke. I thanked them for being with me on what should have been the happiest day of my life. "Thank you all for coming," I said. And then, without hesitation, I told them the truth. I said it plainly. Last night, I discovered Julian and Laura together. I paused, letting the words sink in. They were in his mother's room. On my wedding night. They were betraying me. Without shame and without regret. I heard murmurs instantly. I saw furrowed brows and tense faces. I felt their disbelief fill the room like a heavy fog. "No," my mother-in-law gasped, but my voice didn't break. For the first time in hours, I felt like I was regaining control. Silence took over the room like a wave that sweeps away everything in its path. No one knew how to react at first. My mother covered her mouth with her hand to stifle a sob. My in-laws looked down at the carpet. They looked as if they couldn't bear the weight of the shame their son had brought upon them. Some people stood up in shock. Others looked at me as if they couldn't believe it. But no one said it wasn't true. No one tried to defend them. Because deep down, everyone knew that I was not capable of lying about something like this. My pain was too visible. With a clear voice, I announced my next step. "I intend to annul this marriage immediately," I stated. "I want nothing to do with Julian or Laura ever again. And I hope no one here will try to convince me otherwise." I didn't want pity. I didn't want sympathy. just respect for my decision. My father stood up. He walked over to me and wrapped me in a silent, firm hug. He held me tight, as if telling me he was proud of me. No one applauded. No one protested. They let me go. As I left the room, I heard my mother-in-law quietly sobbing. Her husband was trying to comfort her without success. My own parents followed me to the door. They had reddened eyes. Not from sadness, but from helplessness, from the anger of not having been able to protect me. I walked out the front door. I felt like I was leaving behind not just a wedding, but an entire version of myself that no longer existed. Disappointment hung in the air like a bitter perfume. And in the middle of all that, I left without looking back. I left the estate. I took nothing with me but my dignity. The same dignity that, despite the pain, was still standing. The white dress was stained with dirt, tears, and a story that no longer belonged to me. I walked toward the road with my head held high, like someone who survives a storm without losing themselves. I didn't answer calls. I ignored the buzzing of my phone. I didn't answer questions. That part of my life was dead to me. When I got home, to the apartment I had lived in before meeting Julian, I collapsed. With my soul still raw, I contacted a lawyer. I filed for divorce without delay. I didn't want days of reflection. I didn't want family advice. I didn't want second chances. I wanted to close that chapter with the same firmness with which I had lived it. I handed over the documents. I refused to see Julian again. Not to talk. Not to sign. I was not the same woman who had said, "I do," at that altar. I was someone new. Someone harder. Weeks passed. The pain was a constant companion, but I learned to live with it. Then, I was told that Julian had moved in with Laura. It felt like a punch to the gut. They moved in together as if their betrayal had been part of some grand romantic plan. They walked around town together, holding hands. They acted as if nothing had happened. They acted as if the harm they had done to me didn't exist. I would see mutual friends post pictures of them at dinners, smiling that same fake smile. Julian looked proud. He thought he had found true love. The kind that justifies the unjustifiable. He convinced himself that breaking my heart was necessary collateral damage for his own happiness. And Laura? She walked with her head high, clinging to him like a prize she had won. It made me sick. For a while, I stayed inside. I didn't want to see them. I didn't want to bump into them at the grocery store or the coffee shop. I felt like the loser in a game I didn't even know I was playing. But you know what? Life has a funny way of balancing the scales. Sooner or later, life gives back exactly what you sow. And theirs? It didn't take long to rot. But then, something changed. A few months later, the rumors began to circulate. It started as whispers. "They look tired," someone said. "They left the party early, arguing," said another. Then, the whispers turned into loud, undeniable facts. Neighbors began to complain about the noise coming from their apartment. It wasn't the noise of passion. It was the noise of war. Constant arguments. Screaming matches that penetrated the walls. Yells that the neighbors could hear clearly in the middle of the night. "You never listened to me. You're just like you were with her." Laura no longer smiled with the same confidence as before. I saw her once, from a distance, crossing the street. She looked exhausted. Her shoulders were slumped. She wasn't wearing makeup. She looked like a woman who was carrying a heavy burden she couldn't put down. And Julian? He spent hours outside the house. He was seen at bars, alone, staring at his phone. He was avoiding her. The excitement of the affair had worn off. What had started as a forbidden passion turned into routine. And not a good routine. It turned into distrust, paranoia, and blame. She had destroyed a friendship for a man who didn't know how to love anyone but himself. And he was getting bored again. Because that's the thing about cheaters. The thrill is in the chase, not the catch. Once the dust settled, they were just two people who had built a foundation on sand. Every time they looked at each other, they saw their own guilt reflected back. They couldn't trust each other. How could they? They knew exactly what the other was capable of. Laura probably wondered every time Julian came home late if he was doing to her what he did to me. And she was right to worry. One day, out of the blue, it all came crashing down. Julian disappeared from the apartment he shared with Laura. He didn't pack slowly. He didn't sit her down for a talk. He just left. He left her with only a note on the kitchen counter and a lie. He said he needed space. He said he needed to find himself. But the truth came out within days. He hadn't gone to find himself. He had cheated on her. With another woman. A younger one. A woman who didn't know their messy history. A woman who looked at him with fresh adoration, feeding his ego just like Laura once had. He had repeated his pattern perfectly, because it was never love with Laura. It was never about a soul connection. It was only ego. It was a whim. And when the whim became work, he bailed. Laura was left alone, devastated. She was standing in an empty apartment, surrounded by the wreckage of her life. She had no partner. She had no friends, because she had betrayed the best one she ever had. She had no credibility in our social circle. Everyone knew what she had done. And now, everyone knew he had left her too. She finally understood what she had done to me. But it was too late. Laura, without Julian and without anyone's support, slowly lost the little she had left. She tried to reach out to old friends. She sent texts, trying to act casual. "Hey, long time no see. Want to grab coffee?" But no one replied. People took sides. And they didn't take hers. My family never spoke to her again. My mother blocked her number. Her world crumbled like a sandcastle hit by the tide. She tried to find support, but she no longer had anyone to call. No one forgets a betrayal like that. And she finally felt what it means to be completely alone. I heard she moved back in with her parents in another state a few months later. She left town quietly, with her tail between her legs. I didn't feel happy about it. I didn't feel sad either. I just felt released. Whatever hold the anger had on me started to fade as I watched them destroy themselves. I didn't need to lift a finger. I just had to wait. I, on the other hand, made a different choice. I decided not to wallow. I decided to throw myself into my work. I had always wanted to expand my small boutique, but I had put it off to plan the wedding. Now, I had nothing but time. I poured all my energy, all my frustration, and all my love into that business. I rebuilt myself from within. I didn't seek revenge. I didn't badmouth them around town. I just worked. I opened my eyes to the world again. I surrounded myself with new people who didn't know Julian. I learned to make decisions from a place of calm, not desperation. I invested in myself. I took courses. I refined my brand. I listened to my instincts. And little by little, the sadness gave way to clarity. I discovered that I could be happy without depending on anyone. For the first time in my life, I began to feel proud of myself. Not because someone told me I was pretty. Not because I was someone's wife. But because I was capable. I opened a second store 6 months later. Then a third the following year. In less than a year, my name began to resonate in the industry with respect and admiration. People weren't whispering about the poor bride left at the altar anymore. They were talking about the businesswoman who was taking over the city. Customers, suppliers, and trade magazines all wanted to know who this woman was. They wanted to know how I had built a small empire from nothing. But I wasn't looking for recognition. I was just looking for stability. The independence I had always dreamed of was something I was building with my own 2 hands. And the best part? No one could take that away from me. Julian couldn't cheat me out of my success. Laura couldn't steal my hard work. It was mine. 3 years passed. My life was different now. It was serene, solid, without turmoil or open wounds. I had a routine I loved. I had a beautiful apartment that I paid for myself. It no longer hurt to remember that night. On the contrary, it reminded me of how far I had come since then. I had left Julian, Laura, and everything they represented behind. I had learned to be alone without feeling empty. I loved my own company. And just when I wasn't looking for it, just when I had convinced myself I was better off single, the unexpected happened. It was at a business meeting. I was doing a presentation for a partnership with a larger firm. I was focused, professional, in work mode. That's when I met him. His name was Daniel Jackson. He was sitting across the table, listening intently. He didn't have Julian's flashy charm. He didn't dominate the room with loud jokes. He spoke with a quiet confidence that wasn't intimidating but captivating. He didn't try to impress me or sell himself. He just listened to me carefully. He asked me questions no one had ever asked before. Smart questions. Questions that showed he actually cared about what I was saying. After the meeting, he approached me. "That was impressive," he said simply. There was no cheesy pickup line. I didn't feel butterflies. I didn't feel that chaotic spark I used to think was love. I felt peace. And in that moment, I knew something was about to begin. With Daniel, everything was different from the start. There was no urgency. We didn't rush into anything. No empty promises of forever on the second date. Just sincere conversations over coffee, mutual respect, and silences that weren't awkward. He didn't pressure me. He didn't try to fill any void in my life. He knew I was whole on my own. He accompanied me naturally, letting me set the pace. Slowly, I began to let my guard down. It was terrifying at first. Every time he was nice, a little voice in my head whispered, "Is he lying?" Every time he was late replying to a text, my heart hammered thinking, "He's with someone else." But Daniel understood without me having to explain it. He was patient. He was steadfast. He was constant. If he said he'd call at 8, the phone rang at 8. If he said he was busy, he really was busy. With every gesture, he showed me that you can love without destroying. He showed me you can love without lying, without using another person as a life raft. I learned to trust again, not because he asked me to, but because the way he was with me allowed me to. He earned it, day by day. And with that, I finally healed the last piece of the wound Julian had left. When we officially started dating, everything flowed naturally. There was no need to hide, no need to justify myself. The people around me noticed the change. My dad told me, "You look lighter, Sarah." I was no longer the woman who survived. I was the woman who lived. With Daniel, I shared trips to places I'd never been. We started projects together. We shared simple moments that became unforgettable. Cooking dinner on a Tuesday, reading on the couch on a rainy Sunday. He didn't promise me a future. He offered me a solid present. And after everything I had been through, that meant so much more. But life wasn't done with the surprises yet. I don't know how, but Julian found out I was with someone. Maybe he saw a photo. Maybe he heard it through the grapevine. But soon, he sent me a message. It popped up on my phone one evening while I was laughing with Daniel. It was full of what was supposed to be nostalgia. "Hey Sarah," it read. "Heard you're doing well. I'm happy for you." He said he sometimes thought about what we lost. He said he wished me the best. But between the lines, you could sense the bitterness. It was the bitterness of someone who can't stand to see the person they thought they destroyed be happy. He wanted a reaction. He wanted me to be angry, or sad, or anything that showed I still cared. I stared at the screen. Daniel looked over. "Everything okay?" "Yeah," I said, smiling. "Just spam." I didn't respond. I deleted the message. I owed nothing to the man who took everything from me and still couldn't break me. But Julian didn't take the hint. One afternoon, without warning, he showed up. I was at my main store, arranging a display in the window. The bell above the door chimed. I turned around, expecting a customer. And there he was. Julian stood at the door of my store. He looked different. He was thinner. His eyes were dull, lacking that shine he used to have. His clothes looked worn, as if life was a heavy weight on his shoulders. He didn't look like the golden boy anymore. He looked like a man who had lost his way. My employees stepped forward, sensing the tension. I raised a hand to stop them. "It's okay," I said calmly. I walked over to him. "What do you want, Julian?" I asked. My voice was steady. My heart wasn't racing. I wasn't afraid. He asked for just 5 minutes. "Please, Sarah," he begged. "I just need to talk." He said he needed closure. He said he hadn't stopped thinking about me. "I made a mistake," he whispered. I looked at him calmly, with no anger, with no sadness. It no longer hurt. He no longer mattered. He was just a stranger with a familiar face. I asked him to talk quickly. "I don't have time to look back, Julian. Say what you need to say." He started rambling. He said he had been a coward. He said Laura meant nothing. He said he had lost me because he didn't know how to appreciate me. "I see you now," he said, looking around my store. "I see how amazing you are." He tried to reach for my hand. I took a step back. I listened without interrupting. I had no emotion on my face. It was like listening to rainfall from behind a closed window. Distant. Muffled. When he finished, he looked at me with hope. He actually thought he had a chance. He thought his charm still worked. I looked at him firmly. "Are you done?" I asked. He nodded, unsure. I told him clearly, "You no longer have any power over me, Julian. We no longer exist. Don't think you can get back what you yourself destroyed." I made it clear that I didn't want to see him again. "There is no room for you in my present," I said. "And there is certainly no room for you in my future." There were no insults. There was no yelling. I didn't cry. Just a firm, cold, final refusal. Julian tried to smile. He tried to chuckle, as if to brush it off, as if he still believed he could make me waver. But he wasn't the man who once made me tremble. Now he just seemed small, foreign, irrelevant. "Please leave," I said, "or I'll have to call security." I asked him to leave, and this time I was the one who closed the door. Before he left, his eyes filled with contained frustration. The mask slipped. He looked angry, as if he couldn't stand to see that I was happy without him. He mumbled something under his breath. "You moved on fast," he sneered, as if he wanted to hurt me one last time. But I didn't react. What would have broken me before just slid right off me now. He left without saying goodbye. His shoulders were slumped. He walked out onto the street, disappearing into the crowd. He knew he had lost me forever, because there was no going back. When silence returned to the store, I stood there for a moment. I sat at my desk and took a deep breath. It felt like I could finally live my own life without shadows. I didn't feel euphoria. I didn't feel a triumphant rush. I just felt a sense of calm, the kind that comes when you know you have closed the toughest chapter without getting your hands dirty. I was no longer a victim. I wasn't a survivor. I wasn't anyone's ex. I was me. Whole. Peaceful. At peace. Daniel came in a few minutes later to pick me up for dinner. He didn't know what had happened. But when he saw me, he paused. "You look good," he said, smiling. He hugged me without saying a word. He didn't need an explanation. He just offered his presence, his support, his unconditional love. I looked at him and knew that life, with all its wounds, had brought me to him for a reason. By his side, I didn't feel dizzy. I felt at home. And I finally understood what true love was. I realized that nothing in life is guaranteed, that even the most promised love can break without warning, and that loyalty doesn't always come from the people closest to you. But I also discovered that pain is not the end of anything. It is the beginning of something we can't yet imagine. The ruins of what I once was gave me the perfect ground to rebuild myself. Firmer. Freer. I learned that anyone who survives such a deep betrayal not only recovers, but is reborn. And I had been reborn. Today, I look back without anger or resentment, because the past no longer has a hold on me. I'm still with Daniel. We are talking about buying a house together next year. My store continues to grow. My life is peaceful, bright, and full. I no longer seek approval. I don't need to prove anything to anyone. I only need to be true to what I feel and who I am. This is not a story of revenge. It's a story of dignity, because my happy ending didn't come from another person. It came from me. I never ran into Julian or Laura again, and I didn't need to. Not because I had forgiven them, but because they no longer occupied any space within me. They were just ghosts of a lesson I had to learn. Sometimes people ask me if I would trust someone again after what I went through. They ask if I'm scared, and I always answer the same thing. Not only did I trust again, but I learned to choose better. Daniel didn't come to save me. He found me whole, and chose me that way. I know my story isn't unique. There are many women who have been betrayed, humiliated, or abandoned just when they thought they had it all. But if I want to leave them with anything, it's this. Don't let yourself be broken by someone who doesn't know how to love. Don't stay where there's no respect. The strongest love is the one you have for yourself. Everything else, when it comes, should just be a compliment, never the center. Today, I'm writing this from the terrace of my home. I have a cup of tea in my hand. Daniel is reading a book beside me. The sun is beginning to set, painting the sky in gold. Peace doesn't sound like fireworks. It sounds like shared silence. It sounds like mutual respect. It sounds like knowing that nothing is missing. If you ever thought true love wasn't for you, let me tell you something. It doesn't come when you expect it. It comes when you finally choose yourself. Sometimes when I walk alone through the streets of my neighborhood, I stop in front of a storefront. I see my reflection in the glass. I no longer look for anyone's approval in my eyes. I don't look for the love I dreamed of as a child. I only look to recognize myself. And there I am. With scars? Yes. But also with a strength that I used to confuse with weakness. I learned that pain breaks you, but it also builds you up again. More aware. More you. I keep a box with memories of that day that changed everything. It's tucked away in the back of my closet. Not to torture myself, but to not forget how far I've come since then. Every dry flower, every photograph, every detail of the dress is a testament to a version of me that died that night. It gave way to the woman I am today. I don't throw that box away. I embrace it and respect it, because without it, I wouldn't be here. Daniel sometimes looks at me as if he doesn't understand how someone so wounded can love with so much calm. And I smile at him, not because the past doesn't hurt, but because it no longer controls me. When love is real, it doesn't demand absurd sacrifices. It doesn't ask you to make yourself small. True love begins when you decide not to beg for affection, when you know that whoever chooses you must choose you freely. And so, my story ends. Not with a kiss in the rain, or with a fairy tale wedding. It ends with a cup of tea, a hand to hold, and a peaceful heart. And they lived happily ever after, with a big smile. Because I understood that the real happy ending isn't finding the perfect man, but becoming the woman who no longer needs to be saved from anything, just to live in peace, in truth, and in love. Did you like my story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story. With love and Reese BT.